us from a different time zone. I know most people are joining from Ethiopia and Kenya. So, welcome to this 2-day workshop on research ethics for One Health Research. My name's Dónal O'Mahuna, and I'm a professor in the College of Nursing and the Center for Bioethics at the Ohio State University. And I've been involved with GoHi, the overall sponsors and organizers of this Summer Institute, for a number of years now, I think close to 10 years. Um, I do research on research ethics itself, and in particular, I've been looking at ethical issues that come up with um, within One Health research. My colleagues or my colleague who will be presenting is Professor Joseph Nguta. He's based at the University of Nairobi, and Joseph and I organize or are leading a funded project which has developed a master's degree and 1-year postgrad diploma in research ethics for One Health and emergency research. So, what Joseph and I are going to do in this session is today I will introduce you to One Health research ethics and research ethics more generally. Then Joseph will take over and talk about one aspect, which is the responsible conduct of research, looking at the scientist as a responsible member of society. And this will raise a number of issues around ethics and integrity. And then I'll come back and talk about the way in ethics we use case studies and looking at a method of getting the most out of those. And what we'll do at that point then is conclude the day, and we will provide you with a case study to read over and think about between now, between the end of today's session and our session tomorrow. And then tomorrow's session will start by talking about the ethical issues that you see or you may have seen in the case study. And we'll dialogue with you over the various things that you will have seen there. Um, and then I'll talk about some different approaches to making ethical decisions in the context of One Health research. And then we'll have more time for general questions that you may have about the whole area. So I'll get started with looking at research ethics more generally and what it involves, and then also kind of from there going into where all of this sits with One Health research. So research ethics often is seen in the kind of the history of the development of the field as something that arose after World War II. What I'll talk about a tiny bit is that there actually was a lot of work going on in the area of research ethics prior to this infamous situation. But really, what research ethics is about is looking at the aspects of what is ethical, what is right, what are the good ways to approach research, what are the ways that we ought to treat people. So anytime we use a word like what ought we do or what should we do, what are the good ways to do research compared to, what are the technical aspects, what are the feasible aspects, what are the financially manageable aspects. So anytime we're talking about the right way to do it, the good way, then we're getting into ethics. And what had happened that led up to the Nuremberg trials is that part of the Nazi environment or approach was to use people in concentration camps as subjects of research, which in which they were subjected to horrific things were done to them that in some cases led to their deliberate death. Um, and so this raised an example of something that just was completely unethical, completely wrong. And it led then to one of the first codes of ethics. And a lot of times, this is what we have with ethics, that we have codes, which are descriptions of ways that we should do things, principles by which research should be carried out. Um, Following this, there have been a number of other codes or declarations, um, various statements about the ethical principles. And we'll see tomorrow when we talk about approaches that ethics gives, is that a lot of times there are these principles by which ethics is articulated. And so, for example, the principle of informed consent is the idea that someone who participates in research should always be able to give consent to being a participant, as opposed to what happened in the Nazi concentration camps, where people were forced at gunpoint to be part of different experiments. So there have been a number of very important declarations on ethics. The Declaration of Helsinki is very important. The U.S. Belmont Report was something issued again after the exposure of a very unethical experiment that was carried out in the U.S. Between the 1930s and 1970s, involving poor African American farmers in Alabama. And this then led to an important report, which again laid out some principles by which ethics should be always included in research involving humans. So there are a number of these codes, and it becomes very important then, as somebody doing research, that you're aware of these codes. And we'll mention some of the principles that are involved in these at various times. Um, and it's important also to remember that these codes and declarations are constantly being re-examined. If you notice, for example, the Declaration of Helsinki, it was first published or agreed to in, in 1964, but at various points it has been revised and different types of research have been included, different approaches or different issues have been addressed. So, for example, it's currently under revision at the moment, and there's a global committee examining it. It recently was put out for public comment. And part of what has led to the current revision is that the existing declaration does not address research that's happening during war. And because of the unfortunate increase in the numbers of wars happening around the world, the organizations in charge of the declaration have seen that it's important to articulate a set of principles to guide researchers when they're carrying out research during war situations. So, um, so all of these codes get re-examined from time to time. But one of the unfortunate things about looking at these codes and the ways that different countries and organizations develop these guidelines is that sometimes the focus becomes on, how do we prevent really bad things from happening? How do we stop something like the research during World War II happening again? Or other examples have been with HIV trials that in the 1990s were carried out in low-income countries and were shown to be very unethical because of the various aspects of how they were approached. And so changes were brought in about how do we prevent that type of unethical activity again. And a lot of times it's through developing regulations about how research should be approved, how it should be reviewed before it gets started. But all of this is really important, but one of the challenges with that approach is that sometimes the focus becomes directed on getting a study approved or of complying with the regulations, as opposed to a broader perspective that our team articulates around how do we ensure that what's happening in the day-to-day running of research is ethical in and of itself. So I think a lot of times, because of this focus on avoiding really bad ethical situations, I think sometimes we forget that there actually are good ethical reasons to support doing research. And this actually gives part of the motivation for doing good research. The research, particularly, and this example comes from research being done in humanitarian settings where there's, low resources, widespread poverty, or hunger. And But I think this quote brings out or highlights that doing research that is technically sound, scientifically well justified, carried out with the best of methods, is ethically appropriate because by doing good ethical and scientific research, we're producing new evidence, new data that can help to guide and deliver the best possible health outcomes, even when it's being carried out in the midst of a poor or a situation of conflict, for example, or immediately after a disaster of some type. That by carrying out high quality research that is ethically sound and scientifically solid and rigorous, we can help people in the long run by developing better evidence for the things that are being done. So I think we need to remember that. And that's part of ensuring then that the projects that we plan to carry out are really contributing to the good of individuals or the good of society, either the good of current people struggling with the issues that have led to this research project, or future people that might encounter similar situations. Just as an example of one of the types of research that has led to revisions of various codes, this was a study carried out in Nigeria called the Trovan study. And what was happening was Pfizer was the producer of a pharmaceutical called Trovan, which had been approved for use in adults, but they wanted to find a way for it to be carried out or just to figure out is it effective in children. And they had a study approved in the US, but it was enrolling very few children because meningitis is not commonly does not commonly occur in the US. And then an outbreak of meningitis occurred in Nigeria, and quickly the research team arrived in Nigeria, gave the experimental drug to a number of children, and then after a few weeks left again with the data that they had collected. And this led to a storm of protest afterwards and claims that the people that were involved, whose children were being given the experimental drug, were not aware that this was an experiment. They thought these were, foreign helpers and doctors who had come to give them standard treatments. There were no consent forms. Ethical approval was questioned because all that they had was a letter from one researcher in Nairobi saying that he agreed with this protocol. And so it led to the pharmaceutical company being sued by the government of Nigeria in court in New York. And from our perspective, unfortunately, the settlement or the case was settled out of court, which means our part of the agreement was that the details of what actually happened would not be made public. But it's an example of a type of study that even though there were a lot of needs, there was an uncertainty about whether this drug would actually help or be safe in children. It led to a study that was viewed as very unethical. And it's this sort of situation that we're trying to avoid through the introduction of research ethics approvals, but also looking more broadly at the ethical issues itself. So ethical review then is important for a number of reasons, to protect the participants, to protect their communities as well, that there should not be harm done to the communities from which people come. It also is there to protect organizations, the people that the researchers work for. Um, Peer review is part of the ethics review process, and there are ways that this can lead to improvements in the protocol. So as researchers, we should be remembering that these people who are reviewing these are not trying to just hinder our research, but to actually introduce things that will help it to go better. And there are many national and international guidelines, and it's important as a researcher for you to see what are my institutional requirements. So if you work for a university or for a research organization, to understand the guidelines that apply within those organizations. It's also important to know what are your national guidelines. So for example, in Ethiopia, the Ministry of Science and Higher Education has a set of guidelines for all research being carried out in Ethiopia. And so being aware of that, and also being aware of the details of the international guidelines, because all of these are important for you to reflect on as you're developing your research and then as you're applying for ethics approval. But as I mentioned, it's important to also remember that research ethics is about a lot more than just getting approval and having you go through peer review. So this quote highlights that discussions of ethics have become ubiquitous in the research community. Everybody knows about research ethics and talks about them. But sometimes there can be problems when the IRBs, or the ethics committees, forget the overall purpose of these committees, and likewise researchers may forget the overall purpose, that it's about protecting the subjects of that research. And sometimes there's an imbalance that people are more concerned about getting ethics approval than doing ethical research. And this is highlighted in the Trovan study. So, for example, the researchers got an ethics approval. They got a letter that said they were approved to go forward, but they clearly had not thought about what do we actually need to do the research ethically in the context of Kano in Nigeria. They had not put time into figuring out how do we make sure that the people who are agreeing to allow their children to receive or to be involved in this study, how do we ensure that they understand what's happening? And instead, they just kind of got their approval, said they were going to get informed consent from the parents, and just went ahead, even though the parents afterwards said they didn't understand what was happening. And this is where the ethics of the individual researcher needs to be really important and really emphasized and developed, not just the procedures for getting an ethics approval. What should have happened here is that the researchers should have realized we need to put more effort into helping the community to understand what we're doing, helping the parents to understand this, and many other aspects of the research. Um, so when it comes then to One Health ethics, it's important that we are part of doing One Health research is that we need to introduce a concern for not only the humans in this research, but also the animals or the environment or the plants and all of the components of the research. And this is where part of the reason why we've introduced this workshop, and Joseph and I are working with GoHi in different ways around research ethics, is that there has been very little attention to the ethical issues of One Health in and of itself. There are sometimes difficulties with the regulatory aspect in that if your research involves humans, animals, and the environment, you may have to go through very different ethics committees addressing the ethics of animals, the ethics of humans, the ethics of the environment. There may be national parks committees that you have to get reviewed by, or if your research involves endangered species, there may be additional committees to get examined. And so all of this introduces complexity. It can introduce challenges with getting all of the approvals necessary. And so Joseph and I and some others have been involved in some research looking to explore what are the challenges, the ethical challenges with One Health research. And we were also concerned about ethics during emergencies. We've carried out a survey and done some interviews, but some of the things that we're seeing is that there are these challenges around the One Health research ethics regulatory procedures and approval procedures, so that many people have highlighted that that there's a need for more training in research ethics around One Health, that there's a need for multidisciplinary committees. So instead of going through the a separate human ethics committee, and then an animal ethics and welfare committee, and then an environmental committee, that ways of producing multidisciplinary committees would really help in the procedures. When we asked people open-ended questions about, what are the ethics-related challenges you encounter doing One Health research, the most common thing identified was had to do with ethics committees and review issues. That a lot of these processes take a lot of time, that there's sometimes a lack of knowledge of what One Health is in the committees that are addressing the human or the animal dimensions of the research. But there are also other ethical issues in and of themselves that are challenging. And so the second most common challenge that these participants, who are all either researchers involved in One Health research or members of ethics committees who review One Health research, and they said that one of the biggest challenges is how to figure out the appropriate ways to balance the human, the animal, and the environmental concerns. So, for example, if a piece of research is going to really help human health, but at the same time might be detrimental to animal health, how do you balance those aspects? Or if something could be done that harms the environment but improves animal health, how do you find a way to ethically appropriately balance that? And so these are dilemmas that different One Health researchers are facing and looking for help in trying to find a balance with. There are challenges with community participation. This is believed to be a really important ethical principle that hasn't been emphasized enough in the past. And because of that has led to distrust within different communities towards researchers. So how then, as researchers, do we address this? How do we introduce parts of our research which will actually help to build trust between the researchers and the communities? Um, so these are some of the core ethical issues within the area of One Health that we see researchers being concerned about. And these are some of the things we'll have you look at in the case study that we'll have you read between our workshop sessions. So One Health ethics then is um, complicated by the fact that we have human ethical issues, we have animal ethical issues, there are environmental ethical issues, and then right at the intersection of all of these, we have One Health trying to identify and address the ethical issues that can come up at all of this intersection. And so this is part of what our team is working on, ways to address these and to examine procedures for going through and helping researchers with them. And then this is part of what we'll be looking at during our time together here as well. Um, One important element in all of this that I'll bring up and want to kind of leave you with this to think about. In in the 1960s, when clinical research in the US was really kind of increasing in its frequency, Henry Beecher became concerned about the way ethical issues were being addressed. And I think we're at a similar point today when it comes to One Health research ethics. What Beecher identified was that he looked at the published literature and found many ways that human clinical research was being conducted that violated the ethical principles of the day. And he concluded that informed consent was something that needed to be really emphasized. But he also pointed out that even more importantly than that, there is um, the need to address the ethics of the people doing the research. He said that even more important than informed consent is the presence of an intelligent, informed, conscientious, compassionate, responsible investigator. And these are the ethical values of the researchers themselves. Now, the challenge is that it's a lot easier to see whether or not a research project has informed consent and whether the participants sign them or not. It's a lot more difficult to see, well, are the researchers being compassionate? Are they being conscientious with how they do their research? And this is part of the challenge with research ethics as we see it. But there has been a number of initiatives, and there's a new code, a global code of conduct for ethics, which seeks to avoid what's called ethics dumping. And this is research where researchers from high-income countries come to low-income settings, hoping to do research that they weren't able to get approved in their own countries. So, as a way to push against that and avoid that type of unethical research, this is a project developed these a set of principles that gets more at the ethics of the researchers rather than just the regulatory dimensions. So it talks about developing researchers who are concerned for fairness. So are we fair in how we're asking our participants or how we're carrying out our research with our animals or with the environment? Are we respecting the people and their customs Are we respecting the animals and the environment as we do our research? Care. Are we caring for those involved in our research, whether they are humans or the animals or the environment? And then are we being honesty? Or sorry, are we being honest? Are we being truthful about all aspects of our research? Is there any temptation to fudge the data or to drop certain data points? And then we may have those temptations, but are we honest people who will resist those and only provide the data that is accurate and truthful? So these give ways to, as teams then, to talk about what does it mean to be fair in our projects? What does it mean to care for our animals or the environment or the humans that are part of our projects? And gives another way of really looking at the approaches to be carrying out ethical research. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions so far. I apologize, it's hard for me to keep up with chat while I'm also talking. But we're before I introduce Joseph and the material he's going to talk about, which leads on from this whole approach to the ethics of the researchers into being responsible researchers. Does anybody have a question? I'll take a look at the slides. Yes, there's a question about whether the slides will be available, and yes, they will be. We'll provide those to everybody afterwards. Okay. Time, Sylvester, you go ahead and ask a question.
Hi, can you hear me? Oh,
Yes, I can.
Hi, thanks so much. I started typing my question, but thanks so much for a great overview. It's something that I discussed with my students this morning, as well as having the patient central and making sure that the patient is always protected. How do we, in low resource, low income, middle income countries, how do we introduce more gatekeeping? Because what we often see is that, sorry, I have a small researcher with me also, 2-year-old.
No problem.
So what we often see is that the ethics is approved, like the study in Nigeria, where you have some level of ethical approval being received by the researchers. However, there's not an ethical researcher behind it, right? And so we're thinking of introducing multiple levels of ethical gatekeeping in terms of, before the researcher is allowed to start, they need to get ethical approval from a university. There needs to be a local university involved in the study. Once they've got the university ethics, then it has to go through to a regional ethics before it gets to our Ministry of Health. But you know, in these middle income countries, like where I'm based in Namibia, it's difficult to enforce. Even when you put this gatekeeping in place, it's difficult to enforce. So what advice can you give us, you know, to sort of make sure that we are putting these checks and balances in place and that we're following through and people aren't taking advantage of the fact that we don't necessarily have the capacity to always be checking everything and making sure that we have these conscientious researchers on teams investigating things in our setting? Thank you.
Okay, great. That's a wonderful question. It's a challenging question. And I would say that it's not only a concern in low income settings and middle income, but also in high income settings. So there's similar concerns that you can get approval for a project and just go ahead and do what you want after that, because unfortunately, research ethics regulation, again, most of the resources are put into the review and approval before a project starts. And oftentimes there's no resources put in to monitoring or even collecting reports while the project is being carried out, or doing any sort of checking with the participants or or with the labs where the animals are being housed, to ensure that everything is being done as it was approved to be done. So it is a challenging approach, or a challenging issue, but I think we have to take a long-term view on all of this. That it is something that as we kind of offer more training in kind of settings like this, and within our own universities and organizations, that we will hopefully be impacting the next generation of researchers and some of the current generation in highlighting the importance of not just getting approval, but of actually being ethical researchers. Again, of not just knowing what it means to be informed consent and how to get a form approved, but then what it means in terms of your interactions with participants to ensure that they actually do understand what you're going to be asking them to do, and taking the time with those principles that the trust code has, of being caring and honest, not just getting a signed informed consent form. But it's going to take training, and I think it's also important then to have mentorship, that as researchers um, enter into the field, that they have mentors who are concerned about these issues and will raise them in team discussions in different ways that will hopefully draw attention to these broader, more researcher-based concerns about ethics as opposed to the regulatory aspect. And at the same time, I think then like you mentioned, if a project is being approved at one place but going to be done somewhere else, that there is engagement with a local committee or some type of local organization that can bring the local concerns to bear. Um, this is challenging. In some places there may not be a local ethics committee because there aren't the resources for that. But that in lieu of that, we can hopefully start to have, local people who are able, like even community advisory boards, who will engage with the researchers before they start their projects, who will be able to address the local concerns, and give a clearance, like you say, a gatekeeping role of saying, well, before you start doing your stuff in our community, we want to have a discussion with you and agree that this meets with our values, this meets with the needs that we have in our community. And again, that's about making people aware of all of this and getting that developed. Um, I'll just take one more question that Waktole has asked about differences in the ethics in different countries. And this is a challenge. This is part of where this ethics dumping project and code of conduct has come from. Again, as now there is a global code, it's being increasingly adopted in many parts of the world. And so it's hopefully going to strengthen the ways that low-income countries and settings can say, look, what you're proposing to do is not in keeping with this global code. Therefore, we're going to resist this getting started until you make adjustments. So we want to build in a lot of time for discussion. We will have some more time later this morning, And then also tomorrow, we're going to have a lot of time to discuss these questions. Joseph and I are very happy to make this more of a discussion forum than us giving lectures. But I do want to give Joseph time to present his material, and we'll turn it over to him. And you see that his slides are up, and I'll allow Joseph to introduce himself.
Thank you, Dónal, and good morning. Dónal, good afternoon, participants. Quite an exciting discussion. I was listening, and just to alert you that, as Dónal did say, we did conduct some study, not just in our country here in Kenya, but also in Ethiopia. And we did get a number of challenges that ethics review committees continue to struggle with to ensure ethical conduct of One Health and emergency research, just not in Kenya, but also in Ethiopia, and they are quite a number. And we also got suggestions from different members seated in ethics review committees and regulation of scientific research in Ethiopia on how we should move forward, as you're asking, to ensure that research is conducted in an ethical manner. I mean, if it's going to be accepted by the society, because unethical research, again, it risks being a kind of not accepted by the people whom we continue to struggle to conduct the research for the society. It's a discussion which is going to continue. So I'm going to talk about the scientist as a responsible member of society. I am a professor here at the Department of Public Health, Pharmacology and Toxicology in the Faculty of Vet Medicine in the University of Nairobi, with a lot of interest, not only in natural product pharmacology and toxicology, but also in One Health research ethics. So the scientist as a responsible member of society. We are going to look at science and social responsibility, the basis for social responsibilities in science, communicating science with the public and the media. We're also going to take a look at expert testimony and the ethical issues associated with the same, participation in policy debates as a key role of scientists, and the ethical issues associated with the same, military research and ethical issues associated with the same, and we're also going to look at dual use research and the ethics of the same. Now, scientists have ethical obligations to benefit society, and again, avoid causing harm. I think we have been taken through the history of research ethics. And this is based on experiments which were being conducted by scientists in an attempt to benefit society, but they ended up causing harm to the research participants. This is something that should be avoided at any one time. And that's why Dónal has talked about the informed consent, the respect for people, the autonomy. He has talked about the Bermond report, which arose from the injustices which were being conducted on research participants. But again, scientists, as we all know, and we are all scientists, are seated there, continue to endeavor on daily basis, and we can benefit society by conducting research. That one can advance human knowledge or even produce useful results, or even both. And I'm sure that's all what we are striving to do, all of us, in our different corners, addressing One Health problems, right? towards optimizing the health of humans, animals, and our shared environment. We want to advance knowledge and to produce results that can guide policy towards ethical conduct of One Health and emergent research. Again, we can also benefit society by educating the public about their research. And this can be through lectures like the one I'm giving now. Media interviews, we continue to give experts opinions through media interviews, through websites, in our blogs, and also in books, which we continue to write as scientists. Again, we can also benefit society by developing nutritional or even health guidelines that will go ahead to promote public health. And again, in provision of expert testimony in legal proceedings. I have just said that I am in the Department of Public Health and Pharmacology and Toxicology. Forensic toxicology is a key component in toxicology. And we continue to get cases, to get samples from our clients. And what they are saying is that they are suspecting that their dog, that their cat, that their horse was poisoned by somebody. So they would like to know whether their horse died of poisoning. And there we are now as toxicologists trying to look at the concentrations of different chemical enzymes in different biological samples. The idea here is that the client wants to take somebody to the court, and there we stand as experts to provide information, to provide truth based on science on whether indeed the animal died of poisoning. And at that point in time, we have been in court giving such expert testimonies based on findings from the lab. Again, scientists are involved in provision of expert opinion in government committees, and we are seated in different committees in our government. For example, here, professors are seated in different committees where they give expert opinions to those committees. They also contribute informed opinions to public policy and debates. Now, scientists who work with human subjects, for example, they have an obligation to respect their rights, as Dónal has said, and their dignity, and to protect them from harm and exploitation. And Dónal has already talked about the gatekeeping. One of you has asked about the gatekeeping, the role of ethics review committees as gatekeepers, just not only to review scientific protocols, that's just one, but provision of oversight at each and every stage of the conduct of research. I did happen to be in Ghana at the time of Ebola in 2014. And we had these challenge trials which were being conducted with the Ebola virus. There was no Ebola in Ghana. But then a certain company wanted to infect and treat Ghanaians, infect them with the Ebola virus and treat them with some pharmaceuticals, which I thought were being evaluated for their efficacy. Of course, such a study had been approved by the Ghanaian ethics approvals. But to me, there was no sufficient oversight because what was happening on the ground was inducement of study participants by paying some small amount of money, 400 Ghana cedis, for people to participate. And there was an uproar. This was amounting to exploitation of the public. And there was an outcry all over the place at the Ghanaian parliament there to stop such a study from moving forward. So this is a classic example of our role as scientists. I mean, we have an obligation to respect the rights of our participants, not to coerce them to participate in our studies. I'm sure we are scientists, we continue to enroll study participants. We have an obligation to respect them, that they can withdraw from that study at any stage, that they do not need to be paid to participate in that study. And again, the informed consent, which should be clear to them in their local language, of the harms that could be associated with that study that you want to conduct. This is something that at times it does not happen. Resonating well with our observations, interviewing ethics review committee members, as I have said, just not in my country in Kenya, but also in Ethiopia, and listening to them sharing their experiences on what some researchers do, what I may call unethical practices by some researchers. Social responsibilities may also arise even when scientists do not work with human subjects, right? Because we are talking of what is your responsibility, for example, to the environment. I'm sure many of us, we are excited by One Health research. Much as we want to promote public health, we are also concerned about the animal health and the ethics associated with the same, and the environmental health. Give me the example, for example, of anthrax outbreak. And we want to contain the anthrax, the spread of anthrax, the jumping of the spores from animals to humans. How do we manage it's a disease to ensure that even if the animals are being killed, they are killed in a humane manner? That's one. And we'll be respecting the rights of the animals. And so, how can we ensure that the disposal of the anthrax positive cases do not harm the environment? We have a responsibility to ensure that even the chemicals that are being used for the decontamination of Bacillus anthracis positive animals do not harm the environment. All scientists have ethical obligations to benefit the society and avoid causing harm. I've just given you the example of the attempts to conduct a challenge trial among the Ghanaian population. Much of the science we are pursuing as a good for the people. I mean, testing of therapeutics and coming up with possibly a drug which can treat Ebola. But why should they introduce an highly infectious virus in a community, in a population, which is free from such an infection? Now, scientists can avoid causing harm by restraining themselves from publishing or conducting research that may be used, one, to harm the environment, two, to harm the economy, or even other species, as I've said, or the society by extension. Through social responsibility is an important principle while conducting research. It can also lead to some ethical dilemmas because it can conflict with other principles. such as openness and freedom. And we are going to see in this lecture. Conflict may also arise within the principle itself when scientists consider how best to balance the benefits of the efforts to promote public health and the risk of those efforts to society. What are the bases? Now, the basis for social responsibilities in science is twofold. One, first, like other members of the society, we scientists have the moral obligation to avoid causing harm and also to benefit others. We have obligations which are related to benefits and harms, extending beyond human society and include other species, habitats, and ecosystems. We have obligations to avoid causing environmental damage. I mean, we are one of scientists. Two, another obligation is that scientists do receive various forms of support from society, right? We continue to get funding from our governments, from other governments. Even we have been taken to school by public money. Many of us went to public schools, so we have been supported by society. And even as professors in public institutions, we are being paid by taxpayers' money to do the job that we are doing. And as such, we have an obligation to provide public benefits in return for the support that we continue to receive. We have an obligation to provide public benefits to the society in response to the support that we continue to receive from the public. For many years, scientists have recognized that they have social responsibilities. The eminent English scientist and philosopher Francis Bacon, who lived between 1561 to 1626, did inspire the first scientific association, the Royal Society of London. Francis Bacon did argue that the goal of science was to produce knowledge that would have practical value and consequently would benefit human beings. The father of microbiology, as I said, we are all enthusiasts in One Health research. But one major One Health problem are the vector-borne diseases and microbial resistance. It's our key zoonosis, our key One Health problem. So the father of microbiology, the French scientist Louis Pasteur, who lived between 1822 to 1895, made many important discoveries which helped to prevent disease, and again went a long way to save thousands of human lives. Now we are going through some examples of eminent scientists who did recognize their social responsibility to the society. Now, Louis Pasteur did find the germ theory of disease and developed vaccinations against rabies and anthrax. And you can imagine how this vaccination changed the landscape of zoonotic diseases. The physicist and the philosopher Albert Einstein, who lived between 1879 to 1955, did believe that he had a social responsibility to help the Allied forces to stop the threat posed by Germany, Japan, and Italy in the Second World War. he did initiate the top secret Manhattan Project, leading to the development of atomic bombs. Another example is that the marine biologist Rachel Carson, who lived between 1907 to 1964, this published an influential book, Silent Spring, 1962, which warned the public about the dangers of diphenol trichloroethane, that's DDT, and other pesticides for wildlife and human beings. Remember, DDT continues to be banned from use as a pesticide. I mean, following the great work from Rachel Carson. Carson's work did help to launch the modern environmental movement and also led to increased government legislation on pesticidal use. Sorry, I'm experiencing some short echo. Sorry, just a few minutes, it's coming back. Just some internet interruption from this end. Yes, go ahead. I can see your hand is up. Yeah, you can still ask the question as I wait for. Sorry, just I mean. Sorry for that. Sorry for that. Sorry for that. So we're still looking at scientists as a responsible member of society. So let's get to communicating with the public and the media. So communicate with the public and the media about one's research raises ethical issues because the public and the media may understand and may misinterpret scientific information. Lay people and reporters may misunderstand or misinterpret one, the evidence that we continue to get from science, scientific concepts, scientific theories, and the arising recommendations. For example, if a study shows that a gene increases the chances of homosexuality in males by 10%, a reporter may write a headline saying that scientists have discovered a gay gene. If a small but a vocal minority of the scientific community does not accept the hypothesis that human activities producing greenhouse gases are causing the earth to warm, the public may interpret this as showing that there is no evidence for human-caused global warming. Again, if a study shows that having a glass of red wine a day can reduce the risk of heart disease, some people may conclude that having 3 or more glasses of wine a day would be even better at preventing heart diseases. Some scientists are so concerned about being misunderstood, being misinterpreted, or being misquoted that they decide not to communicate with the public or the media about their research. And this is something that we are continuing to see. Others may decide to oversimplify, just to dumb down their research to avoid being misunderstood or misinterpretations from the public and also from the media. But remember, well, these reactions are quite understandable. One would argue that they are not socially responsible because we have an obligation. We have a duty to share our research findings with the public. As I have said, our research is supported in one way or the other by the society. Scientists who refuse to communicate with the public or the media about their research findings ignore their obligation to benefit the society. Now, people can benefit in many ways from learning about science. Scientific knowledge can help people to learn how to take care of their health and also the environment, as well as understand the world and their place in it. Yes, scientists are often asked, we are talking of now the expert testimony in many occasions. And I gave you the example of what our lab continues to do here at the forensic lab. Scientists continue to be asked to provide expert testimony in court cases, including at times of criminal prosecution. For example, the case I've given you, when one is suspecting that his dog has been poisoned by somebody else. At times of medical malpractices, at times of product liability litigation. Scientists are also asked to provide expert opinions for government committees, deal with such issues as chemical regulation, deal with such issues as environmental pollution, deal with such issues as food and drug safety, deal with such issues as water quality, deal with issues such as electric power generation, highway, and airline safety. The other day, we had a big debate in regards to genetically modified or food derived from genetically modified organisms. And we had scientists from agriculture, scientists from the vet sciences, scientists from health sciences, or giving expert opinions to government committees on how safe genetically modified or food generated from genetically modified foods are. And that informed the ultimate decision that was made by the government in regard to importation of foods derived from genetically modified organisms into the country. But the expert testimony is associated with ethical issues. For example, one, the first issue is financial conflict of interest. Why? Because experts in legal cases, they are paid by a particular party, remember. They may have a financial interest in promoting the interests of that party. And definitely, this could bias their testimony. Two, non-financial conflict of interest. An expert may have a personal, professional, political interest in the outcome of a court case or in a committee hearing. And I'm going to give you an example. A medical expert for the prosecution in a rape case, who is the mother of a daughter who was raped, would be strongly tempted to bias a testimony in favor of the prosecution. And by so doing, this physician will be acting in an ethical manner. Should not be honest, right? In a testimony. Two, a participation by scientists in debates. Scientists as informed expert, because we are informed, because we have facts, we have data to support what we say, and concerned citizens, as informed experts and concerned citizens, can make important contributions to public policy debates on issues ranging from nuclear energy to environmental regulation to even gun control. There are several different ways in which scientists may participate in public policy debates. One, conducting research which is relevant to policy debates and publishing results in the open literature. They can also participate by educating the public about the relevance of their research for policy debates. Why 1 year of research? For example, and we can continue to educate the public on why we should no longer talk about public health, animal health, environmental health, and why we should talk about One Health, why we should address the 3 different health sectors in one, and why we should sit in one table, the 3 of us, and address health in totality or as a whole. 3. Now, if we may look at these 2 ways in which scientists may participate in public policy debates, they reinforce the image of the scientists as being objective and impartial. The scientist conducts research and describes and explains facts because whatever we say is based on facts. I've just given you the example of the study which we conducted ERCs in Kenya and Ethiopia. And what I'm talking about are the facts and the bare facts. Science can also participate in policy debates by, this is the 3rd way, advocating for regulations, policies, or political viewpoints. Now, this 3rd way, however, has the potential to impact the objectivity of the scientist, right? Maybe you could be having some interests, right? So you may lose objectivity while advocating for a certain policy to be adopted by a certain level in governance structures. And remember, objectivity is one of science's most important values. It is worth to know that scientists are citizens first and scientists second. To avoid compromising the objectivity or creating the impression in the public mind that they are biased, then scientists should exercise prudence and good judgment when participating in policy debates. So that's a call to all of us. That's a call to all of us to continue to participate in policy debates which shape regulations, which shape policies. We should always exercise prudence and good judgment to avoid being biased. We have to be objective. It's a core value in science, objectivity. Military research. Now, since ancient times, scientists have assisted with military efforts. I'm going to give you examples here. Archimedes, will live between 287 to 22 BCE, did develop weapons to help the Greeks to defend against the Roman invasions. Again, the English physicist Isaac Newton, will live between 1642 to 1727, did research on ballistics, which did help the military towards improvement of its aiming of cannons. The German chemist Fritz Haber will live between 1868 to 1934 and won the Nobel Prize in 1918 for synthesizing ammonia, developed chemical weapons that were used in the First World War. These are great contributions of scientists in military research. The American physicist Robert Oppenheimer, who lived between 1904 to 1967, did oversee scientific research for the Manhattan Project. I did talk about this project earlier in my lecture. The computer scientist Alan Turing, living between 1912 to 1954, again did help the British military to break the Germans' code or codes during the Second World War. These are key contributions of scientists in military research. But there are ethical issues arising from military research. One, the primary ethical issue concerning military research is whether scientists should do it at all. Should we be involved in military research? It is a primary ethical question that we need to ask ourselves. Many people oppose the military on philosophical or even religious grounds. For example, if having a military can be justified, I mean, if we should be having a military, then military research can also be justified on the grounds that it's necessary for the military to achieve its objectives. While this argument for military research has considerable merit, it is important to be mindful of its limitations. One could coherently maintain that many types of military research, such as research on biological weapons, or even using torture as an interrogation technique, are unethical. Or maintaining that other types, such as research on bulletproof jackets or vests, or treatments for traumatic brain injuries resulting from the battle, are ethical. Questions concerning the ethics of different types of military research are beyond the scope of this lecture. Two, a secondary ethical issue concerning military research is whether it should be conducted on academic campuses. Some military research is kept secret. It is actually classified to protect national security interests. Some people object to conducting classified military research on university or college campuses because it violates the ethical principle of openness, which is essential to academic research. I mean, whatever we are saying, we continue to remind ourselves that it should be reproducible. It should be open. It should be accessible to society. But then, military research is classified. We're asking ourselves, then, should it be conducted in the first place? So, should it even be conducted in a university campus? If a group of scientists are going to lock themselves in the lab, conduct some research, and never share those findings in any forum, never publish those results, should then such research be allowed? We were talking about ethics reviews. Should even the ethics review committee approve such a study, which clearly those results will not be shared with the society, with the public? Dual-use research. Now, the term dual-use research was coined at the beginning of the 21st century to refer to research that may be used for either good or bad purposes. Scientific research conducted with the goal of benefiting society may yield results that can be misused by others, such as criminals or terrorists, to cause significant harm to the national security, to public health, to society, to the economy, or even to them, or even to the environment. And I did say that I'm a natural product pharmacology and toxicologist, and we continue to isolate active principles from natural products of marine biodiversity, of plant biodiversity, of animal biodiversity. Resin is a biological toxin which is isolated from castor oil plant, that's Ricinus communis. There was a time that there was an outcry that an envelope had been sent to the then president of the United States, Barack Obama, containing a very toxic agent. And that agent was resin. Anyway, from where I sit, I didn't understand how it could have been poisonous, even if we did open the envelope. But this is a clear example. Well, such a compound can be useful as a toxicant, for example, towards elimination of pesticides in one way. It can also be used by criminals or terrorists to cause harm to others. So that's a clear example from where we see it of a dual-use research. Yeah, isolating some compound which can easily be useful in our environment, but then it can also be misused by others. Since 2001, the dual-use research that has generated the most controversy and has involved experiments involving dangerous pathogens and toxins. An example of such published studies include one research that could be used to develop smallpox viruses that can overcome the human immune system, defense system. A paper described how to infect the US milk supply with botulinum toxin. a study demonstrating how to reconstruct the extinct 1918 Spanish influenza. Research on genetically engineered H5N1 avian flu virus so that it can be transmissible by air between mammals, including humans. Ethical issues associated with dual-use research. Now, dual-use research raises difficult ethical issues for scientists, funding agencies, journal editors, and the society. On the one hand, the principles of openness and freedom there are no restrictions on publication or funding. Additionally, the results of research often have the potential to benefit a society. On the other hand, social responsibility may favor restrictions on funding, publication, or even funding a publication of dual-use research if the results of such research could be used to cause significant harm. Dual-use research can be difficult to evaluate, not only because fundamental values may be at stake, but also because there is usually a great deal of uncertainty concerning the risks of the research. We are even asking ourselves, should ethics review committees approve the conduct of such a study, which in one hand it can be beneficial to the society, and which on the other hand can be used by criminals, by terrorists to cause harm to humans, to animals, and to their shared environment. Even ethics reviews committee, how should they move with such a kind of research? And then should we even ask ourselves whether they have the capacity to review such a kind of a research? Thank you for your attention. I would like to take questions on the scientist as a responsible member of society. We have quite some time. We have 25 minutes for discussion. Over to you, Dónal, and I can see the chat here. Many questions here. Let me try to see. Well, oh, I hope as far as you heard me. Oh no, so yeah, there's a time when yeah.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Joseph? If you want to put your hand up or just open your mic and speak.
Yeah, Genberu, go ahead. Genberu, go ahead. But then I have a question here. I have a question here from Fufa. I have seen in different media when animals were harmed and killed in humane ways, even by gun. Is there a tangible regulation and punishment measures taken against that action? How can we minimize that bad action what measures should be followed? Yes, this is unethical. This is unethical because animal welfare advocates for humane killing of animals. And here in our country, we have the Animal Welfare Act, which provides guidelines on how animals should be treated in an ethical manner. And any violation on the rights of animals, such as inhumane killing, mistreating of animals, whether using them in our farms, for example, donkeys, they are used here, and I was also in Gonda, and I saw how horses are used. I mean, it's punishable. It's an offense, which is punishable. It's actually it's a criminal offense, and it is punishable. It's punishable here in our country. Yes. So far, I'm saying yes. For example, here in our country, we have the Animal Welfare Act, and the rights of animals are respected. And any violation of the rights of animals to such an extent cannot be accepted. It's punishable by law. Here in our country, it is clear. It is punishable by law. And then we're asking how we can minimize that bad action. And again, we have, for example, here, our association, the Kenya Vet Association, we have the Kenya Society for the Protection of Animals, for the protection and care of animals. We are quite vocal, but we continue to provide media briefs in regards to ethical use of animals in our farms, and even in teaching, and even in research. So what measures should be followed? Yes, it is the role of each and every citizen to follow the law. And the law is clear that animal rights should be respected. Okay, yeah, then yeah, I cannot see another question. So yeah, Jaberu, go ahead. Jenberu, go ahead. Jenberu, go ahead, please. Jenberu, go ahead. Your hand was up.
You're showing as muted, Kinbaro. He's just said he cannot hear.
Jenberu says you cannot hear.
Okay.
Okay, there are some other questions here. Is One Earth research ethics strictly and or conceptually different from biomedical research ethics as we know it? Thank you. Actually, both biomedical research ethics is a part of One Earth ethics. Biomedical research ethics is a part of One Earth research ethics. One Earth research ethics ethics addresses ethical conduct of research at the human, animal, and environmental interface. Right? One Health research ethics addresses or looks at a point when One Health research, much as we are moving towards promotion of public health, but also in strict compliance with the welfare of the environment and the welfare of the animals. So while we are conducting biomedical research, we should be aware of the effects of that research to the environment. We should be fully aware of the effects of that research to the animals. For example, if you are conducting that research I gave you, you are in the lab, and I gave you my example of you are looking for a compound that can treat salmonellosis, for example, then you should be mindful of how you are going to dispose those lab reagents. They should be disposed in a manner that is not going to cause injury to the environment. It should be disposed in a manner that is not going to cause harm to animals. It should be disposed in a manner that's not going to harm aquatic animals. It should not find its way into water systems where maybe it can contaminate fish. It can contaminate aquatic life. So One Health research, basically ethics, basically says that One Health research is an ethical project. We cannot afford, we can no longer look at biomedical research in isolation. We should be addressing such issues as the environmental safety, animal safety. And that's why, for example, in our faculty at the University of Nairobi, we have the biosafety committee, because such research should also be assessed on its effect on the environment. To what extent is it going to, and how are you going to handle your reagents which you are using in your lab? How are you going to dispose them? To what extent have you carefully considered how you are going to minimize any harm that the research may cause to the animals, to the environment, much as you want to promote public health? Another question here is humanity vis-a-vis animality. How to harmonize during ethical clearance in developing countries. And yes, Dónal did talk about some challenges which continue to face ethics review committees because the multidisciplinary nature of One Health research. It's a time when we are calling for inclusion of physicians, public health professionals, environmental health professionals, animal health professionals in these research ethics committees. I did interview ethics review committee members from all our ethics review committees in the country, and it came out clearly that there is a disconnect when it comes to ethics review of One Health research, in the sense that all the disciplines, all the One Health sectors are not well represented in our ethics review committees. So the best way, better we can harmonize ethical review of One Health research protocols is again by inclusion of professionals from the One Health sectors in the ethics review committee. That way, will be able to address environmental issues, will be able to address animal health issues, and again, public health issues in a One Health research protocol, because that is what it's meant to address. Again, Ayele here, you're asking how would we include this One Health ethics in organization? Any strategies so far identified? And one way is what we are doing, Ayele, we have a master's program and a postgraduate program in One Health and emergency research ethics. And there we are training a new cadre of professionals who are no longer responding to disease outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics. We're just looking at public health promotion alone, but the kind of professionals who are going to ensure ethical response to disease outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics, which are actually emergencies in their own way, in an ethical manner. COVID-19, which is a zoonotic disease, they are no longer going to just look at public health promotion, but again, they are also going to pay special attention to ensure that the welfare of animals, and again, the welfare of the environment is well considered in any response kind of plan, right? So this is one way in which One Health ethics can be grown in organizations. These are professionals, it's a new kind of professionals who are going to serve in our key research institutions. Ayala, we are training for our key research institutions. For example, the International Livestock Research Institution, we have trainees from that institution. The Institute for Primate Research, we are talking of the Kenya Medical Research Institution. We are talking of key university, for example, the University of Nairobi. And we do believe that in the next few years, we are going to revolutionize the way One Health research is conducted, the way we conduct surveillance campaigns, the way we conduct disease response campaigns. It should be no longer a kind of a response which only looks at humans alone, but at a response which pays special attention to animals and to the environment. So that is something that we are doing here. And so far this year, we are graduating a kind of postgraduate diploma students. These people, again, will also be serving. Some of them are also seated in our ethics review committee members. And these are people who have knowledge on how they can balance the burdens and the benefits associated with any surveillance for zoonotic disease outbreak in a manner which is going to share equally the benefits and the burdens across the three One Health sectors: the humans, the animals, and the environment. None will be in disadvantage. So that is something that Ohio State University, through the efforts of Dónal, and again the University of Nairobi, we are spearheading to ensure that we have such a new generation of researchers who can lead efforts towards ethical response to disease outbreaks, to zoonotic disease outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics. Again, Tefera, you have a question here. Does research ethics significantly differ between stable and humanitarian settings? And I'm sure Dónal is going to answer that question. And yes, it does. We are talking about drought scenario. We are talking about flooding. Recently, we had serious flooding in our country. And I'm sure, Mama, you're asking whether, for example, review of a protocol to respond to a salmonellosis outbreak in a community which is displaced by flooding, because we had many communities which were displaced by flooding, will be the same as when you are applying for your ethics approval to conduct your investigation on genetic relatedness or on Salmonella typhi from human samples, animal samples, and environmental samples. The the review mechanism should be different. And that is something that the ethics review members did say. And they did appreciate that humanitarian is a crisis in its own. Humanitarian crisis is an emergency in its own. And we need a new kind of professionals who can well advise. So now such ethics reviews should be conducted. And we're happy that we are training such a kind of professionals, Mamo. And from where I sit, I'm saying that research ethics under normal circumstances and under humanitarian crisis differ significantly. And the approach to or response, for example, to a disease outbreak in a camp with displaced people, right? From floods, from war, but it should be different from our normal research. I'm sure Dónal will be responding at, but we are producing such a kind of professionals, Mamo, who will be best trained to guide ethics review committees and research institutions on how best to approach such emergency situations or protocols which require emergency response. Which professional should lead One Health Ethics Committee? Yeah, a good question again, Ayele. And that comes to our training here. Masters in One Health and Emergency Research Ethics. And these are now the best people, right? These are now the best people who should lead One Health projects because now they are well, they are equipped with skills to guide ethical conduct of One Health research. I'm sure, Ayele, you are alluding to the continuous shift in who should provide leadership among veterinarians, physicians, maybe environmental scientists, and there has been that debate. But now, first and foremost, they should sit together because you are talking of One Health. One Health is not a public health issue. It's not an animal health issue. It's not an environmental issue. It touches on the three of us, the physicians, the veterinarians, and the One Health sectors. But Ayele, I'm happy to report to you that this is a gap which has been existing. And this is a gap which Masters in One Health, the Emergency Research Ethics, is making great effort to address, to equip with skills a new cadre of professionals who are best placed to spearhead One Health research efforts, who will be in a position to ensure ethical response, ethical surveillance, ethical conduct of One Health research. Samawati, Ali, you have a question here. How can we ensure?
Sorry, Joseph, I sorry, I need to interrupt because we only have a couple of minutes left and I want to discuss with the student or with the attendees the case study.
Thank you, Dónal. Thank you, Dónal. So, and Jaberu and is also up. Okay, thank you, Dónal. So over to Dónal, please. Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah, Janberu, I apologize. I know you've been trying to jump in. Will you be here tomorrow? And can you save your question until then?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your nice presentation, Prof. Dónal and Prof. Joseph. I have one question. So, how one has operationalized with one big channels like that's machine learning, big data, because by nature one is data is cannot access easily. So how access or how operationalize with one big channels? Thank you.
Okay, we're almost out of time today, so let's address that question tomorrow. And the same for others that have put questions in chat that we will have much more time tomorrow for discussion. I just want to mention briefly, I have put into the chat here a case study that we'd like you to read and discuss and think about before tomorrow's session. So it's a Word document attached to a chat message. If you can download it now from chat, and Ishetu will also email it to everybody who's registered for the session, so you'll get it that way as well. So this is a case study, and these are descriptions of situations that arise that have an ethical dilemma or an ethical component to them. And we are giving you one that part of our team investigated, which is what we call a thick case, in that there's many issues arising with it. It's complicated. And so there should be a lot of different items that we can discuss in this. With the slides that I'll send on, you'll see a more detailed example of a way to analyze any case study. So we'll send these on to you as well. And in the slides, I explore each of the steps in a little bit more detail. But I'll just flip through those now. Because what we'd like you to do with this case study is to read it through sometime before tomorrow's session. Think about the ethical issues that you can see in the scenario that's there. And then we give 4 questions there on different aspects of the ethical issues, and think about a response that you would give to that issue. If you have time, you're welcome to look at some of the other questions, but think about one of them in particular. And then tomorrow we'll start by giving you a chance to talk about what you brought up or to ask questions about what you see in this case study as an example of an ethical issues in One Health. And then we'll give you time to kind of talk about what you found, raise your questions, and have some general discussion so that other questions from today that didn't come up, we'll have more time to talk about. And then I'll also present a little bit on just what are some of the ethical frameworks that currently exist to help thinking through some of these many dilemmas that come up with One Health research. So thank you for your attendance today, for your discussions, for your questions. They were very insightful and challenging. And so we look forward to coming back tomorrow and talking to you about this further. I realize we're at the end of our time now, but I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes if anybody has questions. I saw your hand up again, Jen Burrow. But if anybody wants to stay on for a few more minutes, I can stay. And then otherwise, we'll look forward to talking with you again tomorrow.